In this movie, I'll introduce you to the options that are available to you in the strokes panel. It will end up converting these hand-drawn numbers at the bottom of the artwork, modeled after Adobe Caslon, by the way, which we're seeing up top, into these thicker, rounded numbers that you see below. So I'll switch back to my base image here. And you get to the stroke options in a couple of ways. First of all, go ahead and select all these numbers by marqueing them with the black arrow tool. And then notice up here in the control panel that we see a line weight value. Illustrator calls it stroke weight, but just about everybody else on the face of the planet calls it line weight. And you'll only see that value, by the way, if the entirety of every single path that's selected is selected. So in other words, if I switch to the wide arrow tool here and I shift click on a single point to deselect it, then we lose that line weight value. But you can still adjust the line weight if you want to by going to the window menu and choosing the stroke command, which has a keyboard shortcut of Control F10, Command F10 on the Mac. Anyway, at the very least, you'll see this tiny stroke panel with a single value, which is weight. So you can always change the line weight. You just have to know where to look for it. Anyway, if I go back here to this little deselected point and I shift click on it to reselect it, now everybody in the selected paths is selected, and therefore I can see the stroke option up here in the control panel. Now there's a variety of different ways to change the line weight. If you click this little up arrow button, you'll increase the weight value in increments of 1. If you press the shift key and click on the up arrow button, then you'll advance to the nearest increment of 10, as you can see here. The same goes for the down arrow. It'll reduce in increments of 1, or if you press the shift key and click on it, it'll reduce to the next 10-point increment. You can, of course, dial in a value, and by the way, these values are accurate to 1/100th of a point. So I could enter 12.75, for example, or you can click on the down pointing arrowhead and you can choose a value. And notice that the smallest value that's available in this menu here is 0.25 point, which is really as low as you want to go. I'll go ahead and zoom in on this text and press Control H or Command H on the Mac to hide my selection edges. Consider that a quarter of a point is 1/4 of a 72nd of an inch, so it's 1/288th of an inch, which means that you're printing about the thinnest line that your output device can handle. So I don't recommend you go any thinner than that. Routinely, a value of 0.3 is considered to be a hairline. I typically don't go any lower than that. Now, in this case, we don't want tiny little hairlines. We want big, thick, meaty lines, so I'm going to change that line weight value to 16 points in order to produce this effect here. All right, next door you can see that we've got the word stroke right there. And I'm going to press Control H or Command H on the Mac so that I'm bringing back my selection edges. And what I want you to note is that by default, the stroke is centered on the path outline. So we've got a 16-point stroke, which means 8 points of the stroke, half of it, is on the inside edge of the path outline. And the other half, 8 points, is on the outside edge of that path outline. Now, there may be cases where you'd prefer the stroke be entirely inside the path or outside. And if that's the case, then you click on the word stroke, and that'll bring up the entire stroke panel. And by the way, if you have a point deselected and you're not seeing the stroke option up here in the control panel, then you can click this double arrowhead icon in the stroke tab in order to expand the official stroke panel. But I'm going to make it tiny again because I don't have that much room on screen. All right, now I'll click on the word stroke. And notice this option right here, align stroke. And by default, it's set to align stroke to center, which is the official way things are done on a PostScript printer. You can, however, set stroke to inside. Now, if you do click on that option, it's not going to make any difference for some of the paths that we're seeing. In fact, all of the paths that I'm seeing right now. And that's because this option is not applicable to open paths. And all of these numbers, with the exception of the 8, which is a closed path that loops all the way around, all the others are open paths and they're not affected. So you can see what happens when I scoot the stroke on the inside of the 8. It doesn't look good in this case. It's not what we want, but in some cases, it'll do you well. You can also align the stroke to the outside if you prefer, and that would produce this effect here. But of course, what I really want is to align the stroke to center for all of these numbers. So there's your introduction to the stroke panel, specifically the line weight and alignment options. In the next movie, I'll show you how to work with a few other options available inside this panel, specifically the cap and corner options.